Greetings fanboys and fangirls, Jared here with another Masters of the Universe video review for you. Today we're going to be checking out a brand new Masterverse figure, and I've been a little delayed on this one, but I thought it was worth looking at the brand new Masters of the Universe Masterverse New Eternia, Whiplash. This is definitely a character that I've kind of went back and forth on over the years. Whiplash has never necessarily been one of my favorite Masters characters. I've always thought the design was just a little, I don't know, something about it just didn't exactly ring true for me. So when I saw that this looked substantially different than the standard way that Whiplash is usually portrayed, I was actually pretty drawn to that. It was something that really made me more interested in the figure because typically I'm never too interested in the standard Whiplash. So this was definitely a good opportunity to kind of reinvent the character as some of these new Eternia figures tend to do. So let's dive in. But before we do, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. We do new Masters Universe content all the time. And be sure to like the video because that helps us out a lot. And comment down below letting me know what you think about this vastly different take on Whiplash. Alright, let's start by looking at the packaging. So there's nothing, really new here necessarily. I'll be glad to see some of this packaging switch out come late this year, early next year, to where they finally feature the art more prominently on the front. For now though, we're still stuck with the old weird blue packaging, which just isn't very Masters-esque to me. You see the figure is displayed and it looks really good, and this is a case where the size of the box really works out well because he takes up most of it and it's just filled with stuff, definitely earning its spot as a deluxe figure. You can also see that it has that signature Amazon.com battle damage on the packaging. Thankfully, I don't ever really keep the packaging, only in a few select cases and with some exclusives, so it's not that big of a deal to me. But still, I can see where some people would be frustrated. On the side, we can see that yes, there definitely is a very standard looking Whiplash beneath some of the armor and things, and it's portrayed in this really nice painting, which should have been on the front. Back here, we do have a really cool art piece, and with a cool little bio there, so if you want to read that, go for it. And down there, we can see the other figures in the way. Still need to get Big Bad to ship out that faker, and he is Whiplash, the tail-thrashing warrior. Down here, we get a little bit of instruction about where to plug in the tail, and there is your UPC or barcode. This is not an exclusive. You can get them on Big Bad Toy Store, you can get them at Amazon, you can get them at Target. So let's go ahead and open this guy up. Alright, and we are in the unusual position of having to do a little bit of assembly for a figure, which we usually don't have to. You can see right there, you just put the tail into the backpack pretty much, and voila, that is it. Alright, and here he is, Whiplash, right out of the packaging. First off, I have to say that there are some real Ganondorf vibes from the Legend of Zelda series. Of course, he's the main villain in most of those games. Definitely this feels like some of the old school kind of iterations of Ganondorf. Just give him a pig nose and he's kind of ready to roll. And I'm probably not the only one that's felt that way looking at the figure initially. The other big takeaway is just the massive size of this guy. It's funny because, as we'll get into a little bit later, he is kind of hunched over and his knees kind of permanently bent a little bit, which was surprising. But to say the least, it was very interesting to realize just how big he was. And just for comparison, you can put him with a pretty standard He-Man here. And even though it doesn't look like there's substantially much different in height, you can definitely tell because the legs are more sprawled out and the knees are more bent, but he's just a lot chunkier. The one thing about it is when you pick him up, he definitely has a whole lot of weight, and there's just a whole lot of mass to the figure itself. Looking at the armor, we can definitely see some things that are just flat out interesting for Whiplash. One of my issues with the basic or classic Whiplash design was always that he seemed just slightly generic to me, like a Monster Man. They might as well have just called him Monster Man. I mean, there wouldn't have been a lot special to him aside from the tail. So I think that this does a lot to give him a little bit more of a visual identity with a cool helmet and the nice armor and all of that. I also really like this giant cleaver kind of axe that they've given him, and we'll take a little bit more of a close look at that a little bit later. Looking more closely at the face here, I think they've actually done a pretty good job of giving some added detail and some extra paint hits specifically around the eyes there. And I think it looks really good. I think my eyes are pretty straight on there, so that's nice. They are shaped a little differently from each other, which I can only assume might be intentional. I mean, this one, it's not that they're misapplied. This one just has more of a rounded edge, and this one goes out a little further. Maybe he's squinting a little bit on one, but it's really interesting. And then I really like how the purple armor has these like kind of buttons throughout, these little armor discs, and they have this blue fur coming out from under it, which is something they carry through with on the belt down here in the loincloth. And it just looks really nice. The monster legs are really cool too, having almost like bird feet down there. From the back, and of course this is Whiplash's most iconic feature, is the giant tail. And it really is giant. I mean, this thing really goes out quite a ways. It really does end up looking like a giant alligator tail. And it's funny how much that this particular figure hits that design aesthetic home. To be honest, I never really thought of it much as an alligator tail until now. So I'm sure it was always supposed to be, but for some reason it just never really registered with me. Something else you can see quite easily is this really nice kind of wash that they have going in the arms and in the legs. And you can see that that dark wash, that dark green, brings out the scales. If they hadn't have done that, it really would have been a shame because you would have lost so much of that detail. So I really do like the new Eternia armor on him. I think it's really nice. And I think that he's a cool looking figure. Looking at this axe just a little more closely, I like the rough texture, which I always hate it when these weapons are too slick. And this definitely has more of a rough, like a grindy kind of texture on it. And I like that there's no paint on the handle, so I don't have to worry about the paint coming off, which is something Masterverse has kind of been bad for. This one, on the other hand, does appear to have some kind of paint. It does feel like it's really well sealed, and it doesn't look like anything's coming off as I turn it, but it's still something to be concerned about. I think this is really cool, though. It's just this awesome giant torch. Yes, as a matter of fact, you can actually remove the flame from that. So if you want an unlit torch, you totally can get that. And they have all sorts of nice little details in there. So that's actually a really cool surprise. And if you want to, you can just pop the flame right back on there, and it can turn to get it at any angle you want. Now, the cool thing is this torch can be used by any of the other Masters figures as well. The other two accessories he comes with are the fisted hands here. So if you just want him to flat out fight He-Man without any weapons, you can do that. Before we look at the articulation, I think it would be a cool idea to take the armor off, and we will switch him into standard classic Whiplash mode. First of all, we'll get rid of the helmet, and there you go. He's already a lot more classic this way. And next up, we will just take the little straps, which are very familiar to us fans of Masterverse or Origins, and you can just undo them. Looks like the hole here isn't quite large enough to take it off from his large head, so we can just pop that off, and then it comes right off. The final piece to remove is the loincloth section. And much like a lot of Masters belts, we can just unclip it back there. And underneath, he is wearing a facsimile of his classic orange belt. Next up, I'll be adding his last accessory that we've not seen, which is the classic Whiplash spear. And what do you know, in just a few simple steps, we've gone from a fairly revisionist Whiplash to a pretty traditional one, all things considered. I also feel like this would be the best place in the video to do a little comparison with the Origins Whiplash. Now, I actually used to have the Classics one, but sold it off a long time ago. One of the very few Classics figures I ever sold off. But then after that, getting him back was nearly impossible because the prices were just so crazy on him. In comparison, though, with the Origins one, you can definitely see how this retains a whole lot of the classic look. But man, oh man, what a great improvement, if you ask me, that this new one really is. Especially because they've done so much to try to legitimize some of those old design aesthetics. The buzz-off torso that just had the stripes, now they've taken that and they've tried their best to do some cool stuff where it's like, you know, scaled pectoral muscles are coming out of this like almost crocodile armor, alligator armor. And they've also tried to make the belt a lot more interesting. They went in and gave all the skin this cool scaly texture. And my favorite enhancement is the head sculpt. I think my biggest gripe with Whiplash in the past, and this has always just been completely just a personal thing, totally subjective, was that I just never got much out of the head sculpt because I thought that they were always just trying to make him look like kind of a monstrous dullard. He has these giant thick eyebrows, and he just kind of, I don't know, he looks like a confused Nosferatu to me. The kind of misplaced teeth and things, and I never thought that they were trying to make him anything other than just looking kind of bumbling and monstrous. But with this new one, I do feel like that they've taken just the initial, the tenets of this one, and they've translated it into something that looks a whole lot more legitimate. For one thing, the eyes have a lot more intelligence to them. He looks a lot more conniving and a lot more threatening. I also think slimming down those giant caterpillar eyebrows was a major, major step in the right direction, because it's, I just think that they were always kind of overdone. So I think slimming them up was always a really, really good call. And also kind of minimizing just how crazy the teeth get on that original. All smart things, all very smart. One aspect we didn't really look at too much before was the fin back there, which is very classic and true to the spirit of that original. I also like overall, and I think your mileage will vary on this, that he's a lot more toned down in his shade of green versus over here it's so limey. So really they did a whole lot to address things that always just bothered me from a subjective standpoint. And for you, these things might not have been a big deal, and you may love Whiplash the way he is. He might be your favorite Classics Masters figure, but for me, he never was. So I'm really glad to see these kinds of changes. Now, let's get into an area that definitely has a surprising aspect that we're about to get to, and that's articulation. Of course, his head can turn all the way around. It does have a surprising amount of range. It feels like it can kind of glide in a lot of different directions, but it can look pretty far down and a fair bit up, especially because he's kind of, permanently hunched over a little bit. However, speaking of that hunch, you definitely can still use the ab crunch a little bit to mitigate that, and there's definitely just a little bit you can do there. It's definitely not as dramatic as others we've seen because, it's stopped by the tail running into it. The other thing is on the arms, you can bring them up to 90 degrees because of the shoulder joints. You can, of course, swivel at the bicep. There is a double jointed elbow that goes beyond 90 degrees, which is nice. You can go back and forth there. You can swivel at the wrist. There are hinges on those hands. There's a waist swivel. There's some really good leg articulation at the hips, so you can do a full-on kick. You can also do some really nice splits. And I love just the thickness and strength of these hip joints down here. So there's lots of articulation down there. One interesting thing though, and this is the surprising part I feel, is that these legs and their construction and everything, you can't straighten them out completely. They're permanently kind of like this. Some people I think are going to find that a little annoying. I know that it feels a little weird to have a figure that won't straighten out completely. I guess that's just a part of the aesthetic here. It is a little odd. I know that there's probably no way the figure would have balanced correctly without that because the tail is so massive. So I know what they're doing, but it's still a little odd in terms of their choices here. You still do get a swivel right there at the upper hip, and you get a nice double joint at the knee there. However, the top part was a lot more tight than the bottom part, but it still works really well. And then you can swivel at the boot, and then down here you do get some pretty nice hinges you can go forward and back with, and you get plenty of ankle rocker pivot. So one thing I totally didn't realize was that you can take the bracelets off to make him even more like classic Whiplash. I like those bracelets being on there myself, and I just think it varies up the design a little bit more. So definitely using the tail as an anchor, you're able to flat foot some really crazy poses. This is him in a really deep stance, almost like he's stalking his prey. This is by far the most intimidating old Whiplash has ever been, in my opinion. So the big point of articulation, though, that I think most people are definitely going to be interested in would have to be that tail. Of course, that's Whiplash's signature thing. So you do have just a basic swivel right there where it was attached, just as a matter of the construction. But what you also have is an internal posing wire right here. Now, comfortably, this is about what you can get with that. You can also straighten it back out pretty easily, or you can bring it in, and that's about what you can get with it. You can, of course, go in conjunction with kind of the swivel there, and it is kind of hollowed out on the inside, so if you turn it too much, it looks kind of weird. But keeping it like this, I think, works fairly well. But don't expect to be able to take this and completely curl it around a figure and hold it up or something like that. It's just not going to happen. So I hate to disappoint you with that. But I think that that was a pretty good execution, honestly, in terms of the tails articulation. I think it works out. And of course, this is the pairing that absolutely had to happen. Whiplash and Clawful have always just been kind of, you know, a duo. If you look at the old cartoons, or if you look at any of the other media, it seems like this is just always a thing for whatever reason. Usually they kind of have a dysfunctional friendship or partnership as they both attempt to serve Skeletor. I definitely do not believe it's an accident that they were both released in such quick succession with one another, kind of one after the other when it comes to these new Eternia Masterverse Deluxes. And I think that's a really great thing, because why wait, right? If you're going to do one, you should really do the other. And sure enough, these guys look fantastic together. I am really happy with the way that these two turned out. It is almost a little surprising to me that Whiplash feels and looks substantially larger than Clawful. And I suppose that that's kind of just a new part of this revisionist aesthetic. But definitely Clawful feels more in line with the size of a standard figure. And Whiplash feels a lot more deluxe, like too bad. So it is wild to see them side by side. I do like that there's a disparity in their size a little bit, because I feel like it makes them more visually interesting. And I think they both look really good. I definitely ended up feeling a lot more pleased with Whiplash than I actually thought I would. Originally, when I saw the pictures, for whatever reason, I just kind of thought that he looked too revisionist for me, which was a funny way to feel, because clearly I didn't have a tremendous amount of love for the original Whiplash design from what I've said here. I don't really know what I was expecting, but it turned out that the standard Whiplash design that they'd kind of fixed up and changed some things on that was under all the armor was really the selling point for me. Once I got all the armor off, even though I really do love the armor on the figure and I think it looks really good, I think the changes that they've made to Whiplash kind of turned him into a character that I'm a lot more on board with visually. Yeah, this is a tremendously cool figure, and it's definitely one that I can recommend that you pick up, especially if you got Clawful. It would be a horrible shame not to complete the duo there, and they just look tremendous together. It truly is amazing just how many of these new Eternia figures that we're getting now. It's starting to be a whole universe in and of itself, and I think Mattel's done a tremendous job with this guy. I think he runs for right around $34 or so, and I was really pleased with what I got for that amount of money. He's really large and bulky, easily 7.5 inches or so tall, and he comes with all sorts of great accessories and changeable looks. Definitely one I would suggest. If you're any kind of Masters fan, he's tremendous looking. But also, if you're just an action figure enthusiast and you just want a cool monster figure that's really cheap, especially compared to a lot of those specialty market options we have right now, then this is the guy right here, and you could have him fight any of your figures. So I just think he's really cool. And it's another great showing for Mattel in the Masterverse series of figures. And it just seems like the hits keep coming with Masterverse, and I am really pleased with how the series is turning out. All right, friends, if you enjoyed the review today, I would really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. It's something very simple, but it definitely helps you keep up with us here on Fanboys Forever. Also, be sure to like the video, because that helps us tremendously and allows that algorithm to kind of pay a little more attention to us, and we really do appreciate that, so our videos can get out to more folks. Also, be sure to comment down below and let me know which mode you like better. Do you like the one where he's all armored up and everything, or do you like his more classic configuration? I think both are really nice, and I don't necessarily have a preference. I guess I kind of lean more towards this just because it turned out so well, and it helped kind of turn me around a little bit on my initial feelings of the Whiplash design. But let me know down below. God bless you and yours, and I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.